The stars are right, and that means it's time for another episode of The Whisper in Darkness. I'm your host, the Man from Lang. Thank you very much for joining me today. On this episode, I am very pleased to bring you the first installment of On Your Own, a series of videos that will focus on solo decks and solo deck building tips. I noticed when I record my videos, I often end up talking about the decks that I play in my spare time, but many of them are never played on the channel. So I decided I would create a series of videos focusing on some of those decks, decks that I've built. It'll also probably feature decks that other players have built and that I have found interesting. I know there are a lot of players out there who are intimidated by the true solo format, so I'm hoping these videos will provide you with some tips on building your own solo decks and encourage you to give the format a try, because it can be a great deal of fun, especially during these times, during the pandemic, when players aren't necessarily able to get together with their multiplayer groups. The first deck I am going to focus on is one that I have been calling Granny Panties. I've been playing it. It's a really young solo deck that I've been playing for the past couple weeks and having a great deal of success with, and so I am going to share that with you today. If you're interested in checking out the deck over at Arkham DB, I will leave the link to the deck in the description below. Before I get started, I'd like to thank the patrons of this channel for their tremendous support. The Arkham Horror LCG community is amazing, and these people have gone above and beyond to bring you content like these Deck Tech episodes. If you'd like to support the channel's goals and see your name on this list, head over to patreon.com, sign up for a tier of your choice, and claim your rewards. That would be awesome. Without further ado, let's get started. I have been playing this really young solo deck that I dubbed Granny Panties for the past couple weeks and having a great deal of success with it. It managed to clear the Return to the Night of the Zealot campaign, and it's currently making its way through the Path to Carcosa campaign, and I've been having a lot of success with it. And I suspect that it would do well in other campaigns as well. The strategy briefly is to use Granny Orne, track shoes, Survivor good stuff, and the latest rogue tricks to evade enemies, move to locations, and discover clues. Enemies who get their panties in a knot are dispatched with a combination of the 18 Derringer or the baseball bat. So for enemy management, we have the 18 Derringer and baseball bat. Granny Orne helps us pass skill tests. We've got track shoes, of course, which are fantastic in Rita, almost her other signature card. We've got Look What I Found, Live and Learn, and Lucky to help discover clues. We've got Active Desperation that helps us eke a little bit more ammo out of our 18 Derringers, or throw it at enemies to generate resources and fight actions if necessary. Breaking and Entering helps us discover clues. Sleight of Hand lets us also play the 18 Derringer as a fast action and get it down so we can deal with our signature weakness Hoods, which can be quite bad if it pops at the wrong time, and Sneak By to generate resources. Finally, we have Perception to help us discover clues, Resourceful to help us recycle some of the Survivor cards in our deck, Take Heart in order to draw some cards and generate resources, and finally Unexpected Courage, just an all-round good staple from the core set that lets us contribute to wild skill icons to any test. So I'm going to break down the deck almost card by card here in the upcoming segment, but there is something I wanted to talk about first, and that is the packs required in order to build this deck. As you may be aware, finding Mythos packs and deluxe expansions for the Arkham Horror LCG has been a real pain in the ass of late. There are many posts on the Reddit page as well as the Facebook group about the difficulty that players have had either finding these packs in their friendly local game stores or ordering them directly from Asmodee. So I thought it would be helpful to not only break down the packs that are required to build this deck, but also throughout the video I'll be making suggestions as to alternative cards that you can play in this deck in case you can't find one of the packs or one of the cards that is necessary. So in order to build this deck, you do need 2 core sets. That's pretty typical of most of the decks over at Arkham DB. You need a copy of The Circle Undone, which is the deluxe expansion that Rita appears in. A copy of the Stella Clark starter deck is required because it does contain the 18 Derringer or Granny Orne, although there are some alternatives that I will talk about in the video. The Path to Carcosa contains the cards like Sleight of Hand and Resourceful, but again, you can make some substitutions if you were unable to get your hands on that deluxe expansion. One alternative to the Stella Clark starter deck is Heart of the Elders, which does contain the cards Live and Learn, Take Heart, and it also happens to contain the Ornate Bow, which is one of the cards I like to upgrade to in this deck. This deck does include one card in the Winifred Habumok starter deck, Sneak By, but it is not necessarily required. The deck can run pretty well without Sneak By, so if you're unable to get your hands on the Winifred Habumok starter deck, no big deal. You can substitute that card pretty easily without hurting the deck's effectiveness too much. And finally, it includes one card from In Too Deep, that being Breaking and Entering. Again, there are a couple of alternatives if you are unable to get some of the latest packs from the Innsmouth Conspiracy expansion, and I will talk about those when we reach those cards. I'm going to break down the assets. First of all, the 18 Derringer and the baseball bat are used, are primary ways of managing enemies that Rita cannot evade. Rita has 5 agility, which makes her very capable at playing an evasion-based game. In fact, I think Rita is one of the first. I've always had a soft spot for evasion-based builds, but Rita's the first one who feels like it's actually done right. I like the flexibility of either being able to evade enemies or kill them if necessary. One of the downfalls of some evasion-based builds is that they're really good at evading everything, but unfortunately there are certain enemies that need to be killed, and if they don't have the tools to do that, they can run into trouble. Rita does have an enemy in her deck that needs to be killed, that being Hoods, because it is a hard counter to her evasion ability. But you also encounter other enemies in scenarios, for example, the Ghoul Priest being one of them from Return to the Gathering, or just the Gathering if you're playing the base set. So I use 18 Derringer and baseball bat to do that. I've gone back and forth on the 18 Derringer. I tested the Meat Cleaver in this particular build to see if that could fill that slot, but I found it a little bit difficult to ride the line between having, I think you need to take at least 2 horror in order to really ride the line with that one, and I just didn't find it quite as reliable as the 18 Derringer, and the Derringer does work better with cards like Act of Desperation. So once your Derringer is empty of ammo, you can throw it at an enemy to generate 3 resources, and or take a fight action at +3. That is very handy, and it also works very well with sneak attack, or not sneak attack, sleight of hand. So you can, if you happen to draw Hoods during the upkeep phase, you can drop an 18 Derringer the next turn, take a couple of shots at them to kill them, and then return to the 18 Derringer to your hand the following turn, in order to, at the end of that round, so then you can play it on another turn, and you have 2 more ammo to work with. The baseball bat, of course, is the survivors don't really have a lot of options in terms of weapons in the core set. There's the basic knife, which if you throw it is pretty good, but not necessarily that great in hand-to-hand combat. The baseball bat has a great combat modifier and deals pretty good damage. A couple swings with the bat is more than enough often to take out most enemies. Unfortunately, the baseball bat is prone to breakage, which can be a thorn in your side from time to time. I've been pretty lucky. I think I've only lost the bat a couple times due to pulling a skull or a tentacle from the chaos bag, but for the most part it's done pretty well, and I typically will upgrade the bats to the ornate bow once I earn enough experience points. Let's talk a little bit about Granny Orne, the ally in this deck. Now, the community consensus is that Peter Sylvester from the Dunwich Legacy Deluxe expansion is the best ally to play in Rita, because he does two things. First of all, he bumps her agility to 6, which is very nice indeed. And he also is a good place to soak horror. And because Rita only has 5 sanity, that can be very important. But Granny Orne has been amazing in this particular build for me. Not only does she boost Rita's willpower to 4, the nature of Granny's ability basically gives her a 5 against willpower tests, which is a good way of avoiding horror altogether. If you can just pass those willpower tests on cards like Rotting Remains, you don't have to worry too much about the horror. The other nice thing about Granny Orne is that she can boost pretty much any of Rita's skills if necessary. If you're taking an investigate action and you fail by 1, Granny ensures that you pass. If you end up making a agility or combat skill test, again, Granny can help you pass those tests if you come up 1 short. During testing of this deck and in games I've played, I've triggered Granny almost every single turn for some reason or another, either during the Mythos phase to help me pass a willpower skill test, or during the investigation phase to help me pass investigation tests. So she is rock solid. She also has 3 sanity, which is a nice place to dump some horror if necessary. And of course, once you have some experience points, you can upgrade to Granny Orne 3, who not only boosts Rita's willpower, but her intellect as well. So effectively, she has 4 willpower and 3 intellect. But if you're making a skill test, that's actually closer to a 5 and a 4, which is excellent. Now, Granny Orne is in the Stella starter deck, which can be hard to get a hold of. Again, you can swap in Peter Sylvester in this spot if you have access to the Dunwich Legacy product. He works pretty well, but if you do that, you may need to boost Rita's clue discovery a little bit, because Granny does play such an important role in discovering clues in this deck. We also have a couple of other assets that I'd like to talk about. Track shoes are in this deck. Track shoes are basically Rita's other signature card. They are absolutely amazing here. You can not only do they boost Rita's agility, but they can help her cover a lot of ground by moving between locations and helping her evade enemies. If you happen to be playing Return to the Devourer below, the track shoes are pivotal in that scenario, because you can basically avoid all of the cultists that have gathered by the main path. You move there, trigger the track shoes, and before they engage you, you're on your way to the ritual site, and you don't have to worry about them. The track shoes do boost Rita's agility up to 6, which is one of the reasons that I think you can get away without playing Peter Sylvester in this particular style of deck, because I found in a lot of the campaigns I've played so far, having 6 agility is typically enough for most circumstances. I know a lot of players like to stack agility in Rita to get her up to a 6 or a 7, but I haven't found that to be all that necessary. So 6 will do you most of the time, and so that's why I was able to swap out Peter for Granny, who can not only boost her agility if necessary, but also does great for willpower and intellect as well. Now, I tested this deck against the Return to the Night of the Zealot campaign, but if you are playing other campaigns, there are a couple of assets you may want to consider. The first of which being Fine Clothes, which has 1 health and 1 sanity on it. And fine clothes are extremely helpful against parlay tests, which are actually quite common at the beginning of many campaigns. The Path to Carcosa being the main one, since you have to play the last king and do a lot of parlay tests in that. Fine clothes can help you get through that if Granny doesn't show up to the party. And it's also useful if you need to parlay with Ichtaka during the Forgotten Age or any of the Silver Twilight cult, Twilight Lodge members during At Death's Doorstep in the Circle Undone. And of course, you have the two Nash and what's his name in the Dream Eater. So Fine Clothes can be a very nice addition to the deck, and that 1 health and 1 sanity doesn't hurt either. If you're playing a particularly horror-intensive campaign like the Path to Carcosa, it doesn't hurt to add a couple copies of Cherished Keepsake from the Echoes of the Path Mythos pack. It does wonders to shore up Rita's sanity, since she does only have 5, and between Granny and the Granny has 3 sanity and this has 2, so that's an additional 5 sanity that the scenario has to chew through. So the Cherished Keepsake can be quite helpful. If you don't have access to the Echoes of the Path Mythos pack, but you do have Stella, you can always wait and upgrade to the Cherished Keepsake level 1 or 2 later in the campaign as necessary. So Fine Clothes and Cherished Keepsake are not in this particular build, but they can be very helpful if you are playing other campaigns. Let's talk about events. The first 3 being Look What I Found, Live and Learn, and Lucky. These are all, at this point, staples of the Survivor card pool, and appear in many a Survivor deck. Obviously, Look What I Found is great because it has 2 intellect skill icons and helps you discover clues if you fail a skill test. It is also one of the few ways that Rita can discover multiple clues at a location. Live and Learn is fantastic if you need to take a second bite at the apple. You fail a skill test, say you investigate, you fail, you can try again, and you get +2 to your skill value for that next skill test. That's pretty good. It also works wonders during combat skill tests against enemies that don't have Retaliate. It's a little trickier to use against somebody like the Ghoul Priest, who will damage you before you can trigger Live and Learn, but against most other enemies, if you need to make a combat or agility skill test, this can help you pass if you happen to get a bad pull from the Chaos Bag. And of course, Lucky really needs no introduction at this point. It just helps you pass skill tests that you would have failed otherwise. I think my advice for playing this deck is you really need to use Live and Learn and Lucky liberally to help you pass those intellect skill tests. During investigate actions, Granny can work wonders once she's on the table, but sometimes, especially toward the beginning of a scenario, when you need to pass some of those early investigate actions, Live and Learn and Lucky are what you need to lean on, since this deck doesn't include cards like Flashlight or the Mariner's Compass or other tools that survivors have, the Old Keyring, for example, that can help you discover clues, mainly because they take up hand slots, and that's what the baseball bat is for. Some of the other events in the deck: Active Desperation. This is a pretty good card in this particular deck. It has 2 combat skill icons, which is always nice when Hoods hits the table and you want to make sure that they die. But it's also very handy once your 18 Derringer runs out of ammo. You can throw it at the enemy. You get +3 combat for that fight action, and you generate 3 resources, which you can then use to play another weapon, either another copy of the 18 Derringer from your hand, or you can play the baseball bat or ornate bow. It also works very well with the ornate bow. Once you've got it down, you can, if your ornate bow is empty and you're toward the end of a scenario and you don't think you're going to have a chance to take the action to reload it, you can pitch it to Active Desperation, and you get +4 fight and 4 resources, which is nice. Don't forget that you can use Active Desperation with weapons in your hand. So if you happen to have a spare ornate bow lying around, you can throw it at an enemy and get the +4 fight, +4 combat for that fight action. You won't get the resources, unfortunately, because the bow needs to be in play, but it is nice to be able to put those extra bows to good use. Breaking and Entering is a very good trick that was released in Into Deep that can help Rita discover clues at High Shroud locations. If you've got track shoes in play, you can add... Rita basically has 8 intellect with Breaking and Entering, which is usually more than enough to succeed by 2. So you not only discover a clue, as well as automatically evade an enemy at your location, which is pretty sweet, because then of course you can trigger Rita's special ability. Now, Breaking and Entering does come from the Into Deep Mythos pack. If you don't happen to have access to that Mythos pack, you do have a couple of options. One is Belly of the Beast, which comes from the Wages of Sin Mythos pack, which lets Rita discover a clue at a location if she evades an enemy by 2 or more. That can be quite good. You've also got Eavesdrop, which comes from the Forgotten Age. Again, it's a little harder to use because you do need to have an evaded enemy on the table in order to play it. And finally, if you happen to pick up the Winifred Habermock starter deck for Sneak By, it also has Pilfer in there, which you can use to discover 2 clues at a location. I think it adds agility to your intellect, and then if you succeed, you can discover 2 clues. I think the biggest issue with a card like Pilfer is it does cost 4 resources, which is a lot of cash for survivors, especially one that survivors don't have a ton of resource generation. So playing a card like Pilfer is very expensive. So personally, I prefer Breaking and Entering, but if you don't happen to have the Into Deep Mythos pack, there are some substitutions that you could make with other cards in your card pool. Finally, there is a Sleight of Hand, which is one of the best tricks in the game that Rita can use. I love to use this when the hoods hit the table. It enables you, you can basically hold off on taking an action to play the 18 Derringer or the Ornate Bow, and then, or the Baseball Bat early in a campaign. Play Sleight of Hand, drop that weapon on the table, swing away with it during your turn, and then pop it back to your hand at the end of your turn, so you can use it later in the scenario. Very, very handy, getting a weapon as a fast action. Hoods are the primary target for this, but it works wonders against pretty much any other enemy in the game. And it can also help you, it's also nice to get a little extra ammo out of the 18 Derringer and the Ornate Bow once you upgrade to it. There are a couple of other events that I'd like to talk about. Sneak By is in the deck. Rita does take a lot of evade actions, so generating a couple of resources for just taking an evade action is a no-brainer in Rita. It also has 2 agility skill icons, which can be very helpful if you need to make a tough agility skill test. Again, if Rita has track shoes on the table, she's already got 6 agility, so I haven't found I've needed to really contribute a lot of agility skill icons to tests, but Sneak By can help. I have played the deck without Sneak By, and it seems to work pretty well without it. So again, if you don't have access to the Winifred Habermock starter deck, you can cut this for another event. And I've played several other events in this slot. Namely a Glimmer of Hope, which has wild skill icons, and you can pull it back to your hand from your discard pile if necessary. A couple of other events that you may want to consider. These events are not in the deck build that I've presented here, but they could make good alternatives if you are lacking some of the cards. Belly of the Beast, of course, is a fast alternative to breaking and entering. You do need to evade an enemy by 2 or more in order to discover the clue. So the timing can be a little bit tricky. You do need an enemy which, again, you're relying on the encounter deck to throw you an enemy that you can work with, but it works pretty well in some situations. I'm currently playing a copy of it in my Silas deck that I'm running through the Innsmouth Conspiracy, and it's come in handy, but I can also see myself cutting it because it's a little bit unreliable. Really depends on whether you've got an enemy present. And another good event is Scrounge for Supplies. It is another good way of not only recycling survivor cards like Resourceful, but Scrounge for Supplies can recycle pretty much any level 0 card in your deck. So if you need to grab that sleight of hand or breaking and entering, Scrounge for Supplies is your best friend. Now, its value does go down slightly as you progress through a campaign and upgrade your deck, because the list of targets starts to reduce a little bit. Obviously, it can't fetch you the Ornate Bow, couldn't fetch you the 18 Derringer if you happen to upgrade to I believe it's the level 2 version of that weapon. But at the beginning of a campaign, I don't think you can go wrong by adding a copy of Scrounge for Supplies. Let's talk about skills, which I think is probably the slot in Rita that I found there's sort of the most wiggle room. I'm still playing around with the skill package in Rita. Perception is your friend if you are playing almost any solo investigator that has low intellect. You really need those 2 intellect skill icons from Perception, just in case you need to make investigate skill tests, or if you encounter an intellect skill test on those rare treacheries like Black Star's Rise and you feel that you need to pass it. Perception comes in handy. I play it in just about every solo investigator unless they have extremely high intellect like Harvey Walters. Perception is frequently makes the cut. Resourceful is another staple of survivor decks. The ability to recycle any survivor card that's in your discard pile is immensely helpful. It can grab you a Look What I Found if you need that. It can grab you a Live and Learn, or a Lucky if you need to pass a skill test. If your baseball bat happens to break, Resourceful will get it back for you. There's just so many things that you can do with this card that really, this is one of the toughest cards to replace in the deck. And if you don't happen to have a copy of the Path to Carcosa, I think you would really feel this card's absence, because it's just such a valuable tool. Again, probably your best bet here is to commit this to agility skill tests if Rita is evading something, because if you've got track shoes down, she's got a 7 agility at that point. So the chances of you succeeding and getting to return that card from your discard pile are pretty high. But don't be afraid to commit it to intellect skill tests either, especially if you've got Granny Orne on the table to fix the test result if you happen to miss it by 1. Those intellect skill icons can come in extremely handy. There is also Take Heart, which was released in both Heart of the Elders and the Stella starter deck. Take Heart has become a staple in many survivor decks because it is one of the few cards that helps survivors generate resources and or draw cards. It can be a little bit tricky to play this one because it only triggers if you fail the skill test. So it's really only good if you know that you are absolutely going to fail the skill test. And even then, sometimes I know in my last playthrough with Silas, I've committed Take Heart a couple times expecting to fail and ended up passing by, just pulling a +1 or an Elder Sign I wasn't expecting. So it can be a little bit difficult to trigger sometimes. However, the nice thing in this deck is that you do have Granny Orne, and that in addition to her ability to raise your skill value by 1 if you during a skill test, she can also subtract 1 from it to help you fail if necessary. So if there is a skill test that you were hoping to fail and you really don't mind failing, and you somehow pass it by accident, Granny can sometimes knock your test down by 1, and you end up failing, so you can gain the resources and or draw the cards. I have played the deck without Take Heart again. I didn't really miss it all that much because it is contingent on failing skill tests, and I tend not to like to fail skill tests, so I don't really miss it all that much. So if you want to play around with the contents of the deck, this is one of the cards that I have cut, and I have had some success with it, without it. Finally, we get down to the final skill card in the deck, that being Unexpected Courage. Again, this is a staple from the core set. Having 2 wild skill icons is awesome. You can commit this to pretty much any skill test, and it will improve your odds of passing. However, there are an awful lot of good survivor skills, so this I consider this one to be flexible. The big advantage of this is it is in the core set, and it does come in multiple, so even if you have one core set, I think you end up with a couple copies of Unexpected Courage, so you should have access to this card. There are a couple of alternatives, one being Last Chance, which I have played in this deck as well. I found that I tended to hoard a lot of cards because when you're playing cards like Sneak Attack, or I keep saying Sneak Attack, Sleight of Hand, and weapons, you tend to hoard those weapons and events in your hand. So your hand size tends to go up as the game progresses. You tend to hold more cards in your hand. So a card like Last Chance, which has 5 wild skill icons, but the number of icons drops depending on how many cards in your hand. I just didn't find it quite as reliable. Another option is Rise to the Occasion, which came out in the Dunwich Legacy cycle. Again, it adds a bunch of wild skill icons, but only if your base skill value is less than the test. So depending on what you've got on the table, the only skill test it's really good for is that it's really, really reliable for is intellect skill tests. And I found it a little bit too narrow for my purposes, but you may have better luck with it. There are a couple of other skills. They aren't in this particular build, but I thought I would mention them anyway. Able-bodied comes with the Circle Undone Deluxe expansion, so if you, you've got to pick up that anyway if you want to play Rita, and if you don't have access to some of the other cards in this deck, Able-bodied, you can substitute it in. Because Rita is only playing 1 item in this deck, it has 3 combat or 3 agility skill icons if you commit this to a skill test. The combat skill icons can be incredibly helpful against if you're making combat skill tests. I find the 3 agility skill icons is a bit overkill. Again, like I said, I really don't find myself needing much more than 6 agility to deal with most enemies on the table. So having the option of throwing 3 agility skill icons to a test isn't as strong. So this one's a little bit more narrow. But the combat skill icons can come in handy. Finally, there is Survival Instinct from the core set. It enables Rita to disengage from multiple enemies, which can happen sometimes if Rita gets jumped by, because her signature weakness is an enemy, the hoods. She can get jumped by multiple enemies a little bit easier than some of the other investigators in the game. So having an option to disengage from multiple enemies and either double move or move and damage an enemy is pretty handy. It's worth noting that Survival Instinct, if say you've got hoods and another enemy at your location, you can evade that other enemy and then disengage from the hoods, which would prevent you from taking that damage and horror. So if you're planning on just evading the hoods altogether, evading an enemy with Survival Instinct and then disengaging from the hoods is a good option. Of course, because this is the level 0 version of the card, you simply disengage. The level 2 version of Survival Instinct is slightly better, or it is better, just plain up better, because it does give you the auto evade against Hoods as well. And Hoods has Hunter, so I guess it's 6 to 1, half dozen to the other with this one. You can either take the disengage and hope that you can put in, like, say if you disengage from Hoods and then double move away, that puts a little bit of distance between you and the Hoods, so they're not going to necessarily engage and attack you during the enemy phase. Or you can play the level 2 version and then automatically evade a bunch of enemies. But of course, if you do that, the Hoods are going to attack you. And man, Hoods hits for 1 damage and 1 horror, which can be tough in Rita, especially if you have to if you're put in a position where you have to evade them multiple times. That's why I prefer just to kill them if they hit the table. I want to talk a little bit about upgrades before I wrap up this video. There are upgrades are really, I think, a matter of personal taste. There are so many cards in the card pool at this point that there are a lot of good upgrades that you can consider for Rita Young. Here I've just singled out a few of them. This deck was originally built to test out the Ornate Bow, a card I hadn't played in solo. I'd seen it do some pretty good work in multiplayer, so I was intrigued whether it could make the cut in a solo deck. I mean, it's a great combat option for Rita, the only problem with it being that it's a little bit slow because you do have to take an action to reload it. Cards like Sleight of Hand and Active Desperation can help with that. Other great upgrades for Rita, of course, Cornered from the Boundary Beyond. Fantastic upgrade for just about any survivor. Turning any card in your hand into a +2 skill value is fantastic. If you've got the Stella deck, you're already playing Granny Orne, you might as well upgrade her to her level 2 version, I believe, or level 3. Level 3 Granny Orne, who adds willpower and agility skill icon, or not agility, intellect skill icons. If you, one thing I would love to, I may test it in my current playthrough, picking up a copy of Charisma from Essex County Express and then purchasing level 2 Peter Sylvester, so I can not only boost Rita's intellect, or Rita's willpower and agility by +1 each, and then also having some more horror soak. So with Granny and Peter on the table, Rita pumps up to a 5 willpower, which is that's pretty good. That's very above it. That's well above average, and will do her very well against most willpower treacheries in the game. And then, of course, the extra agility doesn't hurt. I don't think it's the main reason to play Peter. But, of course, having that little bit extra horror soak between Granny's 3 sanity and Peter's 3 sanity and his horror healing ability, it would be very difficult to take Rita down. If you're having trouble discovering clues, Sharp Vision is a good alternative to pick up at some point. Gives Rita extra intellect skill icons. Might consider replacing Perception with this, or playing it in addition to Perception. As long as you're just making a basic intellect skill test, I believe this one gets 3 intellect skill icons on it, which puts Rita at 5. And if she passes, you can discover an extra clue. So that can be very helpful in this particular Rita deck. And finally, a card I've had a lot of success with, not only in Rita, but as well as the Silas deck that I have been playing through the Innsmouth Conspiracy. Unrelenting, amazing card. Even if you're not playing with any of the Bless mechanics, this one, the ability to either use it to seal the good tokens, that being +1/0 and Elder Sign, to draw cards, which is rare in Survivors, or to seal a bunch of bad tokens in order to just pass a skill test. Unrelenting is very helpful indeed. So I have used it to great success as well. Speaking of the Bless mechanic, I have tested a Bless module in this deck. You do have to pull out quite a few cards in order to play the Bless module, but if you have purchased a lot of the, if you have the Innsmouth Conspiracies expansion, and you've picked up some of the latest Mythos packs, which tend to be, I at least hope they're more available than some of the other packs which are out of print. You can play around with a Bless module. Personally, I found the Bless module a little bit underwhelming in this deck. I always seem to draw the Bless tokens when I don't need them, and then during tests when I really need them, I never see the Bless tokens, which is kind of annoying. Keep Faith is nice because it's fast and you can just dump 4 Bless tokens into the bag. Tempt Fate, again, you get 3 Bless and 3 Curse, which, you know, I don't want to be pulling Curse tokens during when I'm taking intellect skill tests with Rita, but the extra Bless tokens are nice. And Beloved is it's a good skill for Rita. It's got nice icons for Rita, a wild skill icon, willpower, and agility. So if necessary, it's that wild skill icon can be used during intellect skill tests, or you can get 2 willpower, 2 agility, or even a combat if necessary. And it does have an auto succeed if you draw a Bless token. So yeah, I found the whole Bless module a little bit underwhelming. It was a little bit better when I got Ancient Covenant in play, which you can pick up in the Into Deep Mythos pack. That basically once you draw a Bless token, you stop drawing tokens, because I know in one game I drew a Bless token, I was like, hooray, and then I drew the auto fail, which was a big boo. Ancient Covenant prevents that sort of thing from happening. I guess my biggest issue with the whole Bless mechanic in Rita is that if I knew I could draw the Bless tokens during intellect skill tests, that would be fantastic, because then I know, okay, I'm going to discover clues if necessary. But there isn't a very good way to do that. One option is Third Time's a Charm, which I believe came out in Devil's Reef, I want to say, which lets you redraw tokens. So you could basically fish for Bless tokens with it. But it is an event, so you're only going to be able to use it a couple times a game. And it's not necessarily the type of card I'm going to be fishing, returning to my hand with a Resourceful. So I haven't tested that. But yeah, I the whole blessing mechanic, if I knew I could draw Bless tokens when I wanted them, I'd be all for it. But unfortunately, that's not how the Chaos Bag works. And so sometimes you get them when you've if you're taking agility skill tests, you really don't need to be drawing Bless tokens in order to pass those with Rita. So I've had mixed success with this one. I may end up testing it a little bit more, but right now I'm pretty happy with how the deck is functioning all in all. So that is Granny Panties, my Rita Young solo deck. I hope that you found some of the information in this video useful. If you're interested in building and playing this deck, whether you play it in person or online. A couple notes I wanted to make about it. There are a couple weaknesses in this deck. The first being, of course, her 2 intellect is a bit problematic. Sometimes you simply, unless Granny Orne hits the table, or you get a Live and Learn or Lucky or Resourceful in your hand, it can be a little bit tricky to discover clues. I haven't had too big an issue with that, but it is something to keep in mind. It can be somewhat difficult to discover clues from time to time. The other thing I found is that when I've upgraded to Ornate Bow, the Ornate Bow is a little bit slow because you do need to take an action to reload it. Of course, Sleight of Hand and Act of Desperation can help there, but sometimes I find that especially if the Ornate Bow, you've got the Ornate Bow on the table and you end up with a bunch of enemies on the table, this can happen especially during something like the Midnight Masks, where you can end up with a whole bunch of enemies on the table and you simply don't have the time to be dealing with those enemies and reloading the bow. But as far as combat actions go, I mean, using your agility instead of your combat and dealing +2 damage is right on the money for the Ornate Bow. So it can be a little slower, but it does hit extremely hard. and is capable of removing pretty much any enemy that Rita is having issue with. The other thing I noticed, which I thought was quite interesting, that I think is worth mentioning, is that Rita doesn't have access to, because Rita isn't a guardian and she doesn't have access to cards that engage enemies without taking an action. And often when I'm playing a solo deck, I do like to have that option of engaging an enemy without taking an action. It can be extremely helpful. Rita only has one card that does that, that being her signature event, I'm Done Running, which lets her engage all enemies at her location and lets her evade them. I found this to be a big issue playing the Path to Carcosa if you're trying to deal with the Man in the Pallid Mask. Of course, the Man in the Pallid Mask is aloof, so you need to take an engage action to get a hold of him, but he has 3 health, so he can be, unless you've got a baseball bat handy, he can be pretty tough to take down. And one of the other tactics players often use is if you want to try to use his investigate action to get rid of him, is to engage him and then move to a location with a lower shroud value, so that then you can easily or more easily pass that investigate action. That's not really a good option with Rita because she only has 5 sanity. So if you don't have enough soak on the table, engaging the Man in the Pallid Mask and then moving around with him is not something you want to be doing. So if you are playing the Path to Carcosa campaign or any of those campaigns with aloof enemies, I'm thinking here of course, the ubiquitous Whippoorwills from the Dunwich Legacy, and you need to get rid of them, then I'm Done Running is your friend. And while it is awfully tempting to commit it to a skill test, if you know that aloof enemies are going to be about, then I would consider hanging on to that, because that's really one of your main modes of defense. The other nice thing about I'm Done Running is that, take the Man in the Pallid Mask, for example. If you use I'm Done Running to engage him, if you then use Rita's ability to evade him, he does not disengage with you, and then you can continue to evade him for the rest of the turn. You can evade him multiple times and deal some damage to him with her ability. So you can deal it. You could basically use I'm Done Running to engage the Man in the Pallid Mask, evade him to deal a damage using Rita's ability, and then hit him with either your fists or a weapon to take him down before he regains his aloof keyword. So I'm Done Running is really your only option if you want to engage enemies like that. So that can be that I find one of the weaknesses. If I'm playing like a Guardian, you've got access to so many cards like Taunt and Get Over Here that can do that for you, but Rita's card pool doesn't necessarily allow you to do that. That is going to do it for the first episode of On Your Own, taking a look at my solo Rita deck, Granny Panties. I hope that you enjoyed it. I will be back. I have a couple of other videos in this series that I'd like to make. I'm going to take a look at the Harvey Walters deck that I used to beat Before the Black Throne, which is the final scenario in the Circle Undone campaign and one of the most difficult solo scenarios in the game. I'm going to take a look at that one. There's a Roland deck that I saw. I can't remember who built it, but I'm intrigued by that one, and I may take a look at that one as well. Like I said, this is primarily going to be used to feature decks that I have been playing in solo, to offer my tips and tricks that I use when I'm playing true solo. But I'll probably also take a look at decks that other members of the community have built. Arkham DB is a fantastic resource for decks, and if you haven't checked it out, I highly recommend that you do. There's thousands of decks over there. The problem with it is that so many decks are posted that some of the really interesting decks get just hidden. The deck, the front page refreshes so quickly that decks get pushed down the page and never see the light of day. So I'd like to put a spotlight on some of those and encourage you to play them. If you have any questions or comments, make sure you leave them in the comment section down below, or you can just contact me directly at manfromlang@gmail.com. And of course, the Granny Panties deck is the link to the deck is posted in the description down below if you want to take a look at it for yourself. And there is also a write-up about the deck on Arkham DB that is somewhat similar to what I've talked about here, but there may be some new information there as well. So thank you very much for joining me, and I hope that you have a fantastic day. That's going to do it for this episode. If you enjoy what you hear, remember to like, comment, and subscribe. If you need to contact me, I can be reached at manfromlang@gmail.com. I am also on Twitter at manfromlang. Until the stars are right, keep your shotgun close and your elder sign closer. Take care out there, and happy investigating.